Tonight, the princess and the PR crisis. How did the world get so obsessed with Kate Middleton? New video has once again made the Princess of Wales an international topic of conversation after that now infamous family portrait. But will it silence the chorus of conspiracy and rumour around the world? We'll look at how America got consumed. Plus, what's all this doing to public trust? In a moment, some surprising polling numbers, and we will ask if this could be a turning point over the pictures we get from the palace. Also tonight, the Nepali men sold a false promise to fight for Russia. A special report from Kathmandu on the mercenaries tricked into Putin's war with little chance of returning home. And how free are women in Iran and Afghanistan? I speak to the Homeland actress turned activist, Nazanin Boniadi.
The women of Iran and Afghanistan are oppressed and segregated by entrenched systems of power that favour men.
Good evening. It's the question that's grabbed the world's attention. What's going on with Kate Middleton? Providing an answer hasn't been easy. The royal family is now at the centre of a PR crisis, running out of control and giving rise to conspiracy theorists. Well, let's just leave that to the digging on the internet, because we should also remember where this whole controversy started. The Princess of Wales going into hospital for a health issue. Her privacy ought to be respected. But what fueled the crisis was this family photo. It was released on Mother's Day, but quickly rejected by photo agencies after it emerged it had been heavily edited by Kate herself. People didn't just see it as a dodgy Photoshop pic, but also an attempt to alter reality. Well, as we enter the age of AI, it's a real concern. Public trust in institutions can be fragile. Tonight, we'll bring you some exclusive polling about how the whole royal row has impacted opinions about the monarchy. But we'd start with a postcard from America. Questions about the royals are occupying the minds of some of the world's biggest celebrities and the major topic of conversation for late-night TV shows. So how did the world get so obsessed? He's our US correspondent, Mark Stone. And Mark, I mean, really, the world is obsessed with this, but in particular, America.
Yeah, of course. Look, I think this moment for the royal family was always going to be a big moment here in the United States. They have for so long been absolutely obsessed with the royal family. I remember when the Queen died, randomly when people would hear your accent, they would say condolences. When Prince Charles was diagnosed with cancer, again, people would just simply say, we're thinking of your king. And just the other day, my neighbour, in a very serious way, came up to me and said, Mark, what's happened to Princess Kate, as they call her? So it's something that they're always thinking about, and it's reached the White House as well, because, this is a serious point about doctored photographs. The fact that Kate had edited this photograph, the one that has become such a talking point, prompted questions of President Biden's press secretary. People asking, reporters asking, does the White House ever do this? So it's prompted a serious conversation, and it's prompted the most trivial of conversations as well.
From politics down, America is the place where conspiracy so often drives the chatter. It also happens to be the place where they can't get enough of Britain's royal family. And so it is then no surprise that the chatter about Princess Kate, as they call her, is in a state of overdrive.
We love Kate Middleton and we hope that she's okay. I would say that around here, people tend to like a conspiracy theory. Even if we don't necessarily believe them, people just like, I guess, the thrill of it.
We're always fascinated with the princesses of the royal family and what they go through. So I think a lot of people are a little concerned about Kate Middleton and where she's been.
On the US talk shows, she is the dominant thread. On The Late Show with Stephen Colbert.
To put this scandal to rest, the palace has released the original image of Princess Kate skateboarding over a tiger. Skateboarding, okay.
The Daily Show with Michael Costa.
There's 3 kids smiling at the same time. As a parent, I know that's impossible. Also,
where are you? Where are you?
I'm getting too angry now.
Over on The View, though, America's answer to loose women, Whoopi Goldberg seemed to be the only one with a more reflective view.
It's our
fault. It's our fault because we bought into this. When you buy into this stuff, when they start doing it to your family or they start doing it to your kids, it's not cute.
Of course, it's online where the influencers are fueling all this. Kim Kardashian has been off looking for the princess. Comedian and talk show host Andy Cohen wasn't convinced by the latest image of her and asked his 5 million plus followers for their view. For the record, Sky News' data and forensic unit has used a face matching tool to confirm the Princess of Wales does appear in the video.
Let's do it. Let's talk about the first.
And of course, as ever, there is an army of commentators out there because where the royals go and when they disappear, the clicks follow.
And do you think to an extent that you are fueling that as one of so many people who is, you know, part of the online conversation about the British royals?
Yeah, I think there's a way to have this conversation without it going to that level of hysteria and frenzy. And I would hope I'm on the right side of that, just recognizing that there is this interest. This conversation is going to happen whether I'm putting my point of view in or not.
Back underneath the Washington cherry blossom, though, another view.
Don't say Kate Middleton. She's just a human being, you know? That's all I hear on the things. Kate Middleton, Kate Middleton. She's just a woman who had a medical problem.
Maybe the view of a less frenzied majority. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
Well, with me tonight, editor at The Economist and author of The Achilles Trap, Steve Cole, and Christina Lamb, chief foreign correspondent at The Sunday Times. Their views in just a second. But first, I just want to show you this because questions are now being asked about another royal photograph. Getty Images says this picture of the late Queen with some of her great-grandchildren released last year was digitally enhanced. A photo forensics expert has told Sky News the alterations made to the image are a better editing job than Kate's Mother's Day photo and might not have been made by the same graphic artist. There are at least 3 vertical splices and a variation in the number of light reflections in their eyes. So what's all this doing to public trust in the royals? Well, an exclusive YouGov poll for Sky News has asked members of the public if their trust in the royal family has changed in recent months. Of those who tell us if they trust the royals, Kate comes top for trustworthiness with a positive rating of +30. She's closely followed by William. Charles is next on +20. Opinion much more divided on the Queen, while they don't think much of Harry, who's on -25, and Meghan is in the same territory as some politicians. Well, let's bring our panellists back in. I mean, Christina, I'll come to you first. There are so many issues here. It's the conspiracy theories, it's the questions around Kate. It's also trust in what's being put out by the royal family in these images.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, as a foreign correspondent, I do feel like there's so many other issues going on in the world that are perhaps more important than this. But it does seem to have garnered people's attention and has been picked up by all sorts of people across the world. I mean, we even had the King of Netherlands commenting in a walkabout when somebody mentioned seeing a photograph of his family and him saying, well, it wasn't photoshopped. So that's quite embarrassing, I think, for the British royals. But you're right. I mean, there is a question of trust here, and we are at a time when there is a lack of trust in institutions, and that really matters.
I mean, Steve, we don't traffic in rumours, you know, but I have been receiving messages from everywhere, from India, Pakistan, the Arab world, people saying, what's going on with the royals? Where's Kate Middleton? What's happened to Charles? I'm sure you've had the same sort of questions being asked. It's quite extraordinary, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's long been part of our culture to obsess with celebrities and to invent stories and conspiracies around them. I don't think usually, and in this case, very serious, except that it reflects something that is darkening and serious in the world, which is the manipulation of imagery and information systematically to confuse people. And so it's actually an indication, this obsession with the photo, of how much awareness we're starting to develop about the way photographs and videos and other information that we hope to rely on for a picture of what's actually happening in the world are being systematically manipulated as propaganda by governments, by non-state actors. And it's sort of ironic because one of the reasons why this whole thing blew up was because the royal family pushed a photo out to news agencies who, in this world, have to have forensic specialists to tell you which photograph is valid and which one isn't. Now, a lot of the day, they're doing serious work about war photographs from Ukraine or Syria to distinguish propaganda from authenticity. But the royal family got caught in that net, and so now we're still talking about it weeks later.
I think that's the point, isn't it? That it's one thing, you know, at what point I guess we're all, as journalists, foreign correspondents, we sort of think, well, is this really an issue? But when they start to feed into it themselves by putting out this image, it adds to the confusion and the conspiracy theories.
Well, of course, the irony was that the image was supposed to reassure people who were saying, where's Kate? But actually, the day that was put out on Mother's Day, and people started to say, hang on a minute, what about the leaves behind? They don't look the right time of the year. What about the sleeve on her son's or her daughter's cardigan? And so I was thinking at the time, oh, this is ridiculous, it's all conspiracy theory, but actually that turned out to be genuine. So, you know, it just shows that sometimes, you know, these things, what look like conspiracy theories are not. But as Steve says, you know, it is important that we're in a time when it's easy for people to manipulate things and AI and to generate images. We've all seen, you know, videos of what looks like leading politicians making a speech when it in fact isn't.
It's deep fakes. Well, let's get the view again from the United States. As we saw there in Mark Stone's report, the royal story is receiving huge attention in the United States. Let's speak to Erin van der Hoof, a writer at Vanity Fair and co-host of the Dynasty podcast, which has been examining the complex family relationships that tie the royals together. Erin, thanks so much for joining us. I mean, it really has, you know, very serious people in foreign policy, in the foreign policy world in Washington have been writing to me going, what's going on over there? Where is Kate? People I wouldn't really expect to be interested in this issue have been scanning the internet and indulging in all of these conspiracies.
I think it really has snowballed. You know, in the very beginning, there was like a lot of information about her health that went out in the normal channels. And for those of us who follow the royals really closely, you know, it's my full-time job, you know, there was not a lot of reason to be concerned. But I think that what started to happen is that once those original stories were no longer in the headlines, it's hard to find the information nowadays. You know, it's hard to find things on Google. It's hard to find things on Twitter. And when there are so many stories, people started to not understand what was going on. And then as the story gets weirder and weirder, then people get in. They're learning a lot of things that you might already know about the royals if you live in the UK. But if you learn it all at once, it does kind of start to seem strange.
And that's the thing. I mean, we're just, you know, speaking to our correspondent, Mark, in the US. Frankly, Americans have been obsessed with the royal family for the longest time.
But at the same time, they don't really know a lot about how the royals work, what their jobs are, you know, that there's an idea here that it's all frivolous and that there isn't a serious role. And I think people are really surprised when I tell them sometimes, like, no, they're government-funded offices. They are doing a real public service. And I think that not understanding that line is where people do sort of start to, you know, feel more conspiratorial, because it really is a role unlike anything that we have in the US.
I think what's also extraordinary, actually, is if you do start going down that rabbit hole, how deep some of these conspiracy theories are. You know, some of the things are just quite extraordinary when you look at it.
They are. And I think part of the issue is that because the palace has such a focus on the UK media, which makes sense, once again, they are a UK government connected institution, that there are certain ways that, you know, Americans can't always access the same news. And so something might have been debunked, but it's behind a paywall. Something might have been, you know, squashed on the UK, but then the libel laws are different. And so we can go on.
Yeah, indeed. Erin, thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to bring in Steve and Christina. for as long as we've known, there have been conspiracy theories and gossip, and this is an age-old thing. I mean, it's been around for centuries, where things suddenly snowball. I guess this is one thing because you've got the internet and it sort of has taken a life of its own, but it can get quite dangerous as well, these sorts of conspiracy theories, when you think about, I don't know, people who are running countries start to indulge in it as well.
Yeah, well, in fact, great mistakes in foreign policy or war and peace have sometimes turned on a leader's conviction in a conspiracy theory that later turned out to be mistaken. And in this age of authoritarians, I think when leaders are isolated and presiding over very closed systems, closed societies, they're susceptible to these fantasies about their adversaries, even about their own relatives, about their allies.
Your latest book looks at this, with Saddam Hussein and the misunderstandings.
Yeah, I mean, Saddam Hussein provided this strange case study of conspiracy thinking, and we can see it now because he left behind these tape recordings of all of his leadership conversations. And there are all these moments when he's telling his comrades, they're talking to him about cooperation, about participating in the international system. He says, no, you don't understand how it really works. There is a deep conspiracy. You don't get it. I get it. It involves this, that, and the other thing, and it's coming at us, and that's why we need to live in a state of defiance of international norms. And this was a view that he held and acted on over decades.
I mean, Christina, we've all worked in places like Pakistan, Afghanistan, that part of the world. It's not just the Americans who are indulging in this. They often talk about the deep state and there's something more, shadowy figures, this other world that exists that we're not privy to.
Well, I think all of us have worked in Pakistan, and I always remember the discussion of hidden hands behind everything. My favourite one was back in the late 80s, when Pakistan had F-16s, and they had, I think, 3 F-16s crashed within a short period. And one of them had a weird thing happen, which was a wild boar, or a wild pig, had run into the engine at Karachi airport. And so the theory was that the Indians were training these wild pigs to attack the F-16s on Pakistani airports. So, if you could ever come up with a conspiracy theory rather than a genuine explanation,
it would take a life of its own.
I've always felt sympathetic because, these conspiracy theories, wild boars, a case of mangoes that supposedly was responsible for a plane crash that killed a military leader of the country. But it's easy to succumb when you are surrounded by actual conspiracies that burst to life, change the course of political events, change leaders. And, so it's understandably hard to sort the truth from fiction when you have an unstable political elite in an unstable society.
Indeed. So it's not just about the royals. These things can go much wider.
We saw it so much during COVID.
Absolutely.
President Trump saying we should inject ourselves with bleach.
With bleach, indeed. Well, we will continue the conversation. Please do stay with us. As we've been saying, the royals are sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be Sonia Soda, lead writer at The Observer, and Mark Wallace, Chief Executive of Total Politics Group. Lots more to come on The World with me, Yalda Hakim, including the Nepali mercenaries recruited by Russia to fight in Ukraine, who find life on the front line isn't what they signed up for. And I speak to the actress Nazanin Boniadi, who's keeping up the campaign for women's rights in Iran.
Lisa Dowd, and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the president, and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against, is back-breaking work. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Welcome back to the programme. Next, sold a lie and sent to the front line. Russia has been recruiting Nepali mercenaries to fight in Ukraine. Sky News has spoken to one former soldier who said they were lured with lavish promises only to be used as cannon fodder. Our Asia correspondent Cordelia Lynch reports from Kathmandu.
It is the perfect recruitment tool for Russia. Excited-looking Nepali men about to join the fight against Ukraine, unaware of the grim reality ahead. Mercenaries, some lured by money, some misled, and some who never make it back. 35-year-old Ganesh did, but it took him 3 attempts to escape and a lot of prayer. He says the Russians treated the Nepalis like dogs.
For the first 2 weeks of training, life was good. But once we were sent to Ukraine, we didn't have enough food and were beaten by the Russians. It was really bad.
Do you think many Nepali men have died?
Yes, ma'am, of course. Many people.
Ganesh spent 4.5 months fighting in Ukraine. He says they were used as cannon fodder, positioned ahead of Russian soldiers. What was it like for you on the battlefield?
It was very frightening. It wasn't man-to-man, bullet-to-bullet. We were attacked by drones, and it was terrifying.
What's your message to Nepalis thinking about joining the Russian war effort?
I would tell them not to go. They see on social media fancy uniforms and guns, but it's nothing like that.
The Nepali government has said it's illegal to join Russia's battle. It's asked Moscow to return its men and its dead. And yet the young, poor, and often very inexperienced are still secretly signing up in large numbers.
A former foreign minister here, citing testimony from men returning from Ukraine, says up to 15,000 Nepalis are fighting for Russia currently. But the Russian embassy in Kathmandu is yet to provide any official figures.
Estimates vary wildly, but Sky News understands the number is closer to 2,000 and likely growing. The police are trying to track down agents, the middlemen trying to sneak people into Russia on tourist visas.
From Nepal police prospect as a Kathmandu police, we have already arrested 22 suspects, those who are involving in this case.
How big do you think the problem is with the Nepali people being trafficked to Russia to fight in the war?
It's a big, serious problem. Not only big, it's also a serious problem for us.
And many people are dying.
Yeah.
Sita is still at least able to reach her husband by phone, but he's injured, still on the front line, with no idea how, when, or if he'll get back home.
I feel powerless, completely powerless. In the beginning, we didn't hear from him at all, not even one call. When he finally rang, we found out that he was hurt. It's been very distressing.
Do you believe he will come back?
I really hope so.
Nepal now appears caught in a conflict it has no stake in, fueled by those who hoped it would pull them out of poverty. But they're increasingly exposed, with no guarantees of a safe return. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Kathmandu, Nepal.
Well, let's get the thoughts of our panellists tonight. Joining me, Steve Cole and Christina Lamb. Christina, this is a sad situation for these families, for these men, but we've known about this for a long time, that they're being used in Ukraine. They've been used all over the world, really, in places like Syria as well.
Sure. I mean, there's almost always mercenaries in war. They're being paid to go and fight, but they don't know what they're signing up for, really. And as you said, in Syria, I saw mercenaries there working for the Wagner group. I saw Afghans actually who were not being paid. They'd literally been picked up on the streets in Iran and taken to fight in Syria. And then actually, I mean, Ukraine is interesting because on the other side, on the Ukrainian side, there is an issue that the Russians have far more men than the Ukrainians. On the Ukrainian side, there were a lot of volunteers at the beginning of the war. I met people, some British volunteers, but also people from as far away as Colombia going and joining the international brigades.
When you cross over from Poland, you'd see booths of sign up
you
here.
went and signed, absolutely. And it was a bit like the sort of Spanish Civil War, that people were going, really caring about the cause and wanting to fight. But that's different than this issue.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we're seeing those sorts of volunteers there, and there are mercenaries who are fighting on the Ukrainian side, but on the Russian side, we're seeing all sorts of people come through. We certainly, as Christina said, saw the Afghans being sent by Iran, refugees, into Syria as well.
Yeah, but I thought the most striking number in that report was 15,000 Nepalis. If that's remotely accurate, what it tells you is how desperate Russia is for manpower that's non-Russian after 2 years of brutal losses that they've taken. And the political danger of a conscript army drawn from Russia has been obvious for some time, and you can imagine the motivation for spending money to bring outsiders in. And as the subject of the story said, putting them in front of the Russian soldiers to suss out where the drones are coming from, to take the first rounds of artillery. I mean, it's utterly brutal. And even by the lights of being a mercenary, it's something that I don't think very many people would sign up for as a paycheck.
Yeah, I mean, as Christina was saying, mobilization has become such a big talking point in this conflict, needing more people to fight on the Ukrainian side. And on the Russian side, I mean, they've been taking people out of prisons. We've seen the way that the Wagner group has also operated. But this is a sort of a new way as well for them to, as you say, not have the high number of Russians killed.
Right, to isolate as much of Russian society from the costs of this, senseless war that their leader started. And the more it goes on, the more creative Russia's going to have to be to isolate its society from these losses. I feel confident that we don't know how this is really rippling through a society where people can't speak freely and report, even on social media, what their families' experiences have been. But I can also imagine that from the Kremlin's perspective, if you can find outsiders willing to be paid, that's money worth spending, from a political angle.
Yeah. Also, I mean, from what we see of the Russians that are fighting, they're not people from Moscow and St. Petersburg. They're mostly people coming from, that have been taken from remote areas, and lots of people from, far away in Siberia, villages who don't have the same impact politically on this.
Indeed. And as the Nepalis were saying, they're being used as cannon fodder, like so many others in this conflict. We'll keep our panellists here. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, with my interview with the actress Nazanin Boniadi, who's keeping up the campaign for women's rights in Iran. Welcome back to the programme. Still with me, Steve and Christina here in the studio. Now to the next story. This month, the UN accused Iran of crimes against humanity over its treatment of women and girls. They attacked Tehran's repression of peaceful protests that was sparked by the death of a young woman in police custody. Have a listen. This was 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. 2 years ago, she was jailed for allegedly violating Iran's strict rules requiring women to cover their hair with a hijab. She was found dead 3 days after her arrest. Now, a UN mission has shared their findings.
Gina Mahsa's death in custody was unlawful, and it was caused by physical violence in the custody of the state authorities.
Her death provoked nationwide demonstrations, unrest across the country. Demands ranged from more freedoms for women to totally overthrowing the government. Mahsa Amini's death, a lightning rod for many. And not just in Iran, but around the world. Women cutting their hair in solidarity, including this moment from the European Parliament.
Women, life, freedom.
But 2 years on, have the lives of Iran's women changed for the better? The first round of parliamentary elections have been and gone with a record low turnout and accusations of corruption. Hopes of a revolution and stronger rights faded, begging the question, has anything really changed? So it begs the question, what more can be done to protect women across Iran? Well, today I sat down for a conversation with the British-Iranian actress and activist Nazanin Boniadi. She's trying to use her platform to pressure the international community to do more. I started by asking her why the death of Mahsa Amini galvanized so many in Iran and across the globe. Have a listen.
It's precisely because of the juxtaposition of this young woman who was Kurdish, Sunni Iranian, a minority, member of religious and ethnic minority groups, young, vibrant, her whole life ahead of her, with this gerontocracy of Shia, male, geriatric ruling elite men, essentially, in Iran. And that contrast, that is what this is about. It's this new generation who don't want to be ruled by this gerontocracy, this theocracy. They want secular democracy.
Galvanized nation, and as you say, reverberated across the globe. I remember speaking to you on a panel with Afghan women, Ukrainian women, there was you, and there was this idea that women's bodies and the freedom of women continues to be politicized, continues to be used for different reasons and causes. And there was this moment, as you say, with Mahsa Amini, which really captured the imagination of people in Iran and externally.
Yeah, and people, I think, initially thought that it was about hair, about covering and the right to
people cutting their hair.
Yeah, and it was, and that was the outward symbol of it. The mandatory hijab, I think the compulsory hijab is just the outward symbol of the overall oppression that women and girls face in Iran. You see just how it's an entrenched system that opposes women, that oppresses and segregates women and girls. And that's the difference between women's rights being violated and what we call gender apartheid. And we want this to be recognized under international law because the women of Iran and Afghanistan are oppressed and segregated by entrenched systems of power that favor men.
I want to talk a little bit more about gender apartheid. Are you making any headway? Because you've committed now your life to this cause. You travel around the world, you lobby, you talk to different governments and different groups about recognizing this as a concept that takes place in certain parts of the world. Are they listening?
We have a unique and time-bound opportunity to have it included in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty that's currently being drafted. If that happens, what it does is it allows us to hold states to account. States like Afghanistan under the Taliban and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Gender apartheid is essentially a pillar of Afghanistan and the Islamic Republic. If that pillar crumbles, then secular democracy prevailing is far more likely.
We are seeing this UN mission now describing Mahsa Amini's death as unlawful, but does it actually change anything on the ground?
Since then, we've had not only continued crackdowns, but the crackdowns have intensified. The crackdowns are draconian against women. Women are the cars are being impounded and confiscated. Their bank accounts are being frozen. They are being denied jobs. They're being expelled from school for defying the compulsory hijab. It's ongoing. If the fact-finding mission, if the UN member states do not extend the mandate of the fact-finding mission, if they don't renew the mandate of the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran, the Islamic Republic will be empowered to continue.
And just finally, I guess, if there was ever to have a sense of hope in this dark moment, I was comforted by the fact that Afghan and Iranian women were standing almost in solidarity with each other, because Iranian women understood all too well what Afghan women were going through when the Taliban swept to power and took away all their rights.
If the world doesn't pay attention to the plight of the Afghan people, to the plight of the Iranian people, it's a real, not only a moral imperative to do so, it's not only a travesty of justice if we don't, but it will have ripple effects across the world.
Nazanin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Yalda.
That was British-Iranian actress and activist Nazanin Boniadi. Well, Steve and Christina join me here in the studio. And Christina, we're talking a lot there about the regime in Iran. They've been in power for more than 40 years. Do you think these UN missions and these fact-finding missions actually make a difference? Does it put any kind of pressure? This is a regime that's survived under so many sanctions and so much pressure, and doesn't feel like anything's really changed.
Yeah, I don't think the UN declaring Mahsa Amini's death as unlawful really makes any difference to that regime. But I think what has been fascinating is, first of all, when she was killed, the protests, seeing the way that so many people came out and repeatedly, despite the fact that we knew really that there was going to be a big crackdown in the end. I think about 20,000 people were arrested, people were executed. But although those protests have stopped, the movement hasn't stopped. We see so many women in Iran today not covering their heads despite all of the surveillance.
When you think about it.
Yeah. And then we saw in the recent parliamentary elections, as was reported, such a low turnout, only 25% turnout in Tehran. So, OK, the parliament doesn't have a lot of power, but it's sending a message, people not going and voting. So, I do think that a genie has been unleashed from the bottle, and that eventually there will have to be change.
Do you think that's correct, Steve, that this has unleashed something? There was so much talk at the time, this TikTok generation, this was a new generation. It was going to face the regime and bring about some form of change, even though, as Christina said, we knew there would be a crackdown.
Yeah, I think we've learned that social media is not a panacea for such social movements, that the monopoly that governments have over communications and over social media platforms can repress the self-organizing efforts of those who use it from the bottom up. At the same time, to the bigger question, I do think this movement will prevail. It will prevail. It's a civil rights movement, a global civil rights movement that can't be suppressed. It won't go in a straight line, and I have no idea how long it will take in a particular country like Iran or Afghanistan. But I do have confidence that it is the future, and those theocratic regimes, the gerontocracies, and any regime that seeks to deprive half of the world's population of the right to work and education will have to get out of the way eventually.
Well, we've been talking about Iran, but let's turn our attention to Afghanistan. And the top two US generals who oversaw the evacuation of Afghanistan as it fell to the Taliban in August 2021 have blamed the Biden administration for the chaotic departure. In a hearing today, they told lawmakers the evacuation plan was inadequate.
On 14 August, the non-combatant evacuation operation decision was made by the Department of State, and the U.S. military alerted, marshaled, mobilized, and rapidly deployed faster than any military in the world could ever do. It is my assessment that that decision came too late.
General Milley there, but I mean, you know, we know this. I mean, he's not telling us anything, but we haven't all seen.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, in a way, you know, what happened was the biggest humiliation, right, for NATO in its history. And it was absolutely heartbreaking to see what happened and the way that people were just abandoned who had worked with NATO states for so many years. But they kind of almost got away with it because within a few months we had the war in Ukraine and suddenly all attention moved to that and people have switched their focus from Afghanistan. So, you know, both we're in this situation, as you know very well, that it's the only country in the world where girls can't go to high school or university and women can't go to the park, to the gym, to hairdressers, can't work. Which is absolutely unacceptable in 2024. And, you know, yes, it's the Taliban that's done that, but the fact that they were able to take power again raises an awful lot of questions for the West, which to my mind have never really been answered. And it's all very well these generals saying, oh, it was too little too late. What about all of the things they weren't doing for years? What about the fact that they created an Afghan army that was created as a Western army? It wasn't created as an army that was able to withstand the Taliban. And the moment all the Western enablers were removed, of course, they were not able to fight.
And ultimately what we saw was that America, well, whether it wanted to or not, replaced the Taliban with the Taliban after 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, General Milley's testimony this morning has this ring of election year Washington as well, where you have people fighting for their legacies in the face of a humiliation, a national defeat. And so you have the Pentagon throwing the State Department under the bus and the State Department emphasizing the point that the military had an opportunity to strengthen Afghanistan for 20 years and failed to do so in a sustainable way. So I'm afraid from the West's perspective, we have been unable to reckon with our own failures and to really investigate honestly the arrival of the Ukraine war, the fact that there are no winners in Western capitals politically has allowed government after government to sort of skate past this disaster. And you know, it's left an entire nation abandoned to the restoration of one of the most sort of repressive governments in Central Asia.
Yeah, indeed. Well, appreciate both of your thoughts. Both of you know all too well all about Afghanistan, its history. Do stay with us. Still to come on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Concerns of a crackdown on human rights after Hong Kong passes a new national security law. Stay with us for that.
So every year we invite our local Muslim neighbours and those further afield to come in and break their fast with us. We study together looking at a certain theme each year. This year we looked at the theme of friendship, and then we break bread, literally, together. We hear the call for prayer on our bima, on our ritual stage, and then we eat and we sit and we talk for hours often.
It's enjoyable, it's really interesting, and I think it's needed. A massive reason why I do the interfaith work that I do is based on Islamic teachings. And I try to revolve my life around the Holy Quran, and the Holy Quran teaches us that as Muslims, we have a duty to protect people of all faiths and religion and to protect places of worship. So working with Alith and going to the iftar during Ramzan is something that I really look forward to. And I've been there more than once, and it's been incredible.
Definitely. I think that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are on the rise. And the only way that we break down those barriers is by having really deep, meaningful conversation and building relationships. Friendships are the most important thing that we can offer one another at this time.
I think there'll always be conflict in the world. There'll always be issues and conversations that need to be had. And events like this, interfaith events, are super important for us to have an open, honest conversation. On stage at the interfaith, we were talking about how our friendship began working with the United Nations and how it's just developed over time. We've had hard conversations, bearing in mind the current conflict, but it's important that conflicts don't drive wedges between friendships. Rather, we use a friendship for conversation and dialogue so we can move together and build the bridges of unity and unite on our common denominators.
I think we are modelling what this can look like and what real dynamic friendships look like in the world. We are publicly showing how we can talk to one another, be together, and putting an image out for the younger generation of this is something you can do too, it's something you can achieve. When they see people their own demographic do it, it feels more attainable to them.
The beauty of social media is that you're able to put out messages that can reach a vast audience across the world. And there are a lot of misconceptions of the Jewish community and the Muslim community. I think having a platform on social media allows you to remove misconceptions, allows that space for conversation and dialogue, which is so important, and for us to work together to make the world a better place.
Welcome back. At the height of the anti-government protests in Hong Kong, more than 1 million people took to the streets. 5 years later, dissent is more dangerous than ever. Today, Parliament passed new legislation expanding the controversial national security law brought from Beijing that grants extra powers to quash dissent. Rights groups and the UK Foreign Secretary described it as a damaging blow to human rights. Here's our International Affairs Editor, Dominic Weichhorn.
With these words and this vote, a final nail in the coffin of Hong Kong's freedom. In what was once an assembly of boisterous debate, today just unanimous, tame acquiescence to the will of Beijing. Laws hailed by its man in Hong Kong as vital protection for the former colony.
It will safeguard Hong Kong's national security like a big wall around us and take care of all the national security risks that we face.
But speaking in exile in London, One Democracy campaigner said the bill consigns Hong Kong to isolation and economic decline.
John Lee and all the supporters are illusional. All these developments recently, including the implementation of the national security law, mass persecution, driven out all the civil society and also foreign NGOs, has caused Hong Kong, its economy, its prospect, and people's well-being and livelihood.
The people of Hong Kong have fought these security laws for more than 2 decades. Their first attempted introduction provoking huge protests in 2003, with many more to come. The vaguely worded legislation empowers a chilling crackdown on dissent, say critics. Designed to impress more than anything else, just one man, the authoritarian ruler of China, Xi Jinping. Hong Kong's former British rulers say the laws yet again rip up the idea of one country, two systems that China promised to honour at the time of its handover. Britain's Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron saying the broad definitions of national security and external interference will make it harder for those who live, work and do business in Hong Kong and enable the continuing erosion of freedoms of speech, of assembly and of the media. Opposition supporters like tycoon Jimmy Lai have been locked up on trumped-up charges or forced to flee. Protests have failed to stop authorities. Beijing's hand-picked puppet rulers of Hong Kong have prevailed at the cost of its liberties and most likely its economic prospects. Competitors across Asia rubbing their hands with glee. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
Steve Cole and Christina Lamb join me in the studio. Steve, none of this really comes as a surprise. There was shock when the first round of national security laws came in, but now it's sort of expected.
Yeah, I think China had already completed a political and security takeover of Hong Kong a couple of years ago, and now they seem to be extending it law by law at the expense of Hong Kong's place as a free port in in Asia and a place for business and international exchange. I think most of the Hong Kongers I know say the places that they grew up in is long gone.
Yeah, it's a very different place. The whole idea of one country, two systems, pretty much dead in the water.
Yeah, I mean, passing this Article 23, which is exactly what protesters were coming out against, it is very chilling, and it does feel like, you know, it's just all going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and China has obviously defended this, you know, and said that we have to legislate for the security of our country and Hong Kong. Whatever comes will come. So that is obviously the perspective of China on this. Christina, Steve, thank you both for joining us here on the programme. Really grateful for both of your time. That's all for tonight's programme. We're back at 9 tomorrow. Up next, news at 10 with more on the royal PR crisis, a damning report on the state of the world's climate, and while the latest trend in dieting might not be so safe. Good night.